Government Medical College. She has done DM Neonatology at Madras Medical College, Chennai. And she has also done a PG Diploma in Epidemiology and trained in Biostatistics and Epidemiology at CMC Vellore. She has done many presentations. And over to you, Dr. Anita.
Anita must unmute her.
Sorry, sir. Yes. Good evening to one and all. With the blessings of Almighty and my teachers, I'm a little proud to share this platform with my teachers today. I start my presentation on post-discharge follow-up on the preterm infants. I know today we've been following all the topics right in the delivery room and to detect the early developmental delays. And now it's my turn. We know whomever that we've taken care so far in the NICU needs a little more care even after going home. So, of course, this is the usual expected way we want a pregnancy to progress, but sometimes it does not do so. So unfortunately, somebody lands up like this in our NICU suddenly at 6 months, 7 months. We try to provide the best possible environment. Of course, it is not possible to replicate the in utero. We all know that. And with that limitations, we know a baby who is born preterm will never be able to grow up to this term, how much ever best care that we offer them at the NICU. So during their birth hospitalization, whatever be the scenario, we try to make the baby to 40 weeks, if not possible. If unfortunately they get delivered before, we know that we have to be equipped much more enough to take care of them during the hospital and after hospital. So that justifies my talk for this evening today. So my talk would be more of a checklist for a primary physician who's going to take care of the baby after his NICU stay. The NICU his stay is over. For some, it is a very strenuous course. For some, they just walk through it seamlessly. That impresses us that all of them do not sail in the same boat and all of them do not have the same risk of impairment. So, but for everybody, this will be a common principle to get them followed up postnatally. So these are the things that we would like them to undergo. Any infant needs growth monitoring after discharge. We know they are at a very high risk of growth failure subsequently. Their nutrition with a feeding plan has to be formulated at the time of discharge. We take care of their immunization to equip them more against the vaccine preventable diseases. Of course, the developmental surveillance and the screening tests. So all this will comprise the follow-up care for a preterm NICU graduate. So first topic is the growth monitoring. We all know the LBW infants, even in the best NICUs, have a growth failure rate of 65% to 100% at the time of discharge, and babies who are discharged growth failure continue to remain below the percentiles. So growth monitoring is mandatory. What do we monitor? The anthropometries that we monitor are, we know, the head circumference, the weight, the height, or the length. So with this, what would be the frequency that we need to monitor them? The babies who have grown adequately during their birth hospitalization need to be monitored a little less frequently, like saying during the first 4 to 6 weeks, we monitor them weekly or bi-weekly. Subsequently, for the next 2-3 months, we monitor them monthly, and thereafter up till 6 months to 1 year, we monitor them every 2 months. This schedule may not be the same as for the preterm infants are concerned, because they have some of them have undergone a very strenuous NICU course, making them at risk of growth failure subsequently. Babies who have had BPD, babies who have been SGAs at birth, fetal growth restrictions, etc., etc. So their frequency of follow-up has to be much more customized to their need. So what is the best tool to monitor their growth during this postnatal period? So we know gone are the days we have done away with the Fenton's chart. If not, if at all we are using Fenton now, we are using Fenton to just monitor the growth, plot the growth at birth. Because if it is going to be a preterm less than 33 weeks, then this intergrowth 21 may not be a good one. But for subsequent monitoring of the postnatal growth pattern of a preterm, this intergrowth 21 is the best chart. Why? It is the standard prescriptive growth standard. What do you mean by standard growth chart? Fenton is a reference chart. What is a reference chart? We take a sample population and we study their growth. We make a descriptive summary of it and plot it. So here the health status of the reference population is not taken into account at all. So we don't know how should these babies grow. So the reference charts just say how these baby grew. Standard charts describe a healthy population and they describe how ideally a child should grow. So Intergrowth 21 has been constructed much in the same way as our WHO Growth Chart 2006, comprising of healthy population all over the world, both developing and developed countries, breastfeeding babies like that. Healthy preterms have been recruited during the antenatal period. They have been followed during the antenatal with the best methodology possible. And when they happen to deliver preterm, the healthy preterms were taken and their growth was plotted and this growth chart was constructed. So what are the advantages that Intergrowth 21 offers to us? The best advantage is that it merges with the WHO growth chart perfectly at 64 weeks post-conceptional age. Okay, so until 64 weeks or corrected 6 months, we can follow these babies on Intergrowth 21 and step on to WHO growth chart thereafter. We have separate charts, gender specific like Fenton 2. So in office practice for a practicing pediatrician, this is a case scenario. In case a preterm is going to be born 30 weeks, discharged at 34 weeks, he comes to you for a follow-up after 1 week as recommended. You take up his gender specific chart and you calculate the post-conceptional age. Here it would be 35 weeks and plotted on the Intergrowth 21. And when he is 6 months corrected age, you can just transit to WHO growth chart. So second scenario, an infant is born preterm, we do not know the gestational age. After a NICU stay of 6 weeks, he goes home and he comes back to you at a 3 months postnatal age. So try to ascertain the probable gestational age at birth with the early ultrasounds or the LMPs from the mother or the other guardians and calculate the post-conceptional age. For example, the ascertained gestational age, if it's 28 weeks, is 12 weeks post-conceptional, it would amount to 40 weeks and then you plot it on the intergrowth. So this is practically what we do bedside and that finishes growth monitoring. Now going on to the nutrition plan. In literature, when I search, there is no actually one single recommendation which is recommending you follow this particular plan for preterm infants who are discharged from your NICU. They are all based upon individualist approach for each child. So it is mandatory that we learn the principles behind formulating the approach. So we all know babies are growth retarded at the time of discharge. Even in the best NICUs in the world around, the percentage is definitely higher, very frightening. So more than being born as SGA or AGA, it is a postnatal growth pattern which is important and it seems to be significantly associated with the neurodevelopment at 2 years of age. So this is the medical position paper which came out in 2006 commenting on the postnatal growth pattern of infants based on which you individualize your nutrition plan at the time of discharge and follow it subsequently. So this paper divides the infants to 4 categories. The first one is ones who grow appropriately, meaning to say the birth weight and their discharge weight are appropriate for their gestational and post-conceptional ages. The babies who are postnatally growth restricted are the ones who are born AGA, but their discharge weight is below the growth reference curve. They are the majority. And babies who are fetal growth restriction, that is, they are born as SGAs, they continue to remain below the reference curve at the time of discharge too. And babies who catch up early postnatal growth, who are born SGA, but who are appropriate for their post-conceptional age. They are early catch-up growth ones, but here this group has a little concern for us. They are at a risk of metabolic syndrome later on. So with these 4 growth patterns, we are not bothered about the first and fourth category. We are more concerned about the second and third category, who would be the candidates for high growth failure rates later on. So apart from this, we also would like to ensure the quality of growth, which is what is coming up of late. It is not only the weight targets or the height targets or the length that I have to meet, it is the quality of the growth that I am looking at. I want promotion of fat-free mass in my preterms. I don't want a truncal obesity in them. I don't want an insulin resistance to develop later on in their life. So that leads on to optimizing nutrition in these preterm infants. So to achieve my goals of both quantity and quality growth, which which favors a better neurodevelopmental outcome later on with a better metabolic profile in later longer years, my strategies are, of course, achieve a energy density food, but still concentrate upon the protein content, which is your rate limiting macronutrient for your brain growth. So if you want a child to be good, having good neurodevelopment outcome later, you need a good protein content on the macronutrient part. More so, what the thing is catching up is a protein calorie ratio, which is actually it is ideal to be at 22.5 to 2.7. And you look at this paper, which has come out in 2016. It is says about the role of macronutrient enrichment. So after achieving the energy requirements in the baby, meeting a protein energy ratio, increase in the PE ratio leads to an increase in the weight, length, and head circumference. The increase in length and head circumference has been statistically significant in the meta-analysis proved. So next, going on, we know in the NICU, for any preterm, human milk is the best feeding choice. But the human milk is still a little lags behind because of its decreased protein content, calcium, phosphorus, and exclusive feeding with human milk has been associated with poor growth and nutritional deficits in some infants, or probably rather I would say the babies who are at risk of growth failure, that what we described earlier, the category 2 and 3, during and beyond their hospitalization. So feeding of mother's own milk and in its absence donor human milk is definitely better for the preterm for multiple benefits when compared to the formula. But still, in order to make up for the little deficiencies the human milk has, we were looking at multi-component fortification. So the Cochrane explored the possibility of multi-component fortification following hospital discharge, but we could not get an increase in the growth rates subsequently. There was no difference in the short-term gains in the anthropometry, and there was no evidence looking up at the long-term gains. And this latest paper describing the updates on fortification of human milk, it says that fortification after discharge calls in for expressing breast milk and mixing the fortifier, and it's something against or it is interfering with your direct breast milk feeding, and not much trials have been able to go on with this. So in spite of all that, we did have small trials happening and reporting in getting reported in literature in 2019, and all this said, it was safe, tolerable, and feasible to fortify preterm infants even after discharge at home. Only thing, we were not able to give a scientific difference in growth in all these studies. One said you did have better growth, and two other studies you said you don't find any difference in the you don't find any difference in the anthropometry or the neurodevelopment later on in their life. So this is regarding the babies who have been on exclusive breastfeeding in the NICU. What about the babies who have been on formula for some reasons during their NICU stay? For them, for this little fraction of babies, we have three choices: the standard formula, post-discharge formula, and the preterm formula, which we've been using for these babies during their NICU stay. So what would be the best choice to get these babies post-discharge? Which is the best formula? So then Cochrane looked up this, and it said the standard formula or the post-discharge formula does not offer any advantage, but this preterm formula seems to increase growth rates up to 18 months post-term. There has not been outcomes reported on long term. Maybe for a short term, this preterm formula may benefit. So it looks as if this nutrient enrichment in terms of macronutrient enrichment definitely has a role to play in, if not in all preterms, especially in preterms who have postnatal growth restriction and babies who have born with fetal growth restriction. So how long do we give it? We give it at least till 40 weeks post-conceptional age, or if possible, you can continue it for 52 weeks post-conceptional age. So this is something what we work it out for the office practice for a practicing pediatrician. So normal growers, early postnatal catch-up growth people, they can be on their usual ones. If they are on exclusive breastfeeding, they can continue to remain on exclusive breastfeeding even after going home. But these 2 and 3 categories need this nutrient enrichment. So regarding the supplementation, the key nutrients and their sources, we need to supplement calcium and phosphorus, vitamin D and iron in exclusively breastfed infants. In babies who are on preterm formula, we need not supplement calcium and phosphorus. The formula contains enough amounts of these. We still need to put them on vitamin D and iron. For the babies who are on multi-component fortification with human milk fortifier, we still need to add iron and vitamin D. Calcium and phosphorus would be adequate. So regarding the duration of supplementation, multivitamins and vitamin D, iron are supplemented till 1 year of age. Calcium and phosphorus, we can stop it at 40 weeks post-menstrual age. We know beyond 40 weeks, the tubules get matured enough to absorb your phosphorus. So those, the extra supplementation does not help in improving bone mineralization after this any further. So human milk fortification, we can usually expect it to reach, when the baby reaches 2 kg, we can discontinue it. So coming on to the third subtopic of immunization, gone are the facts, myths that vaccinating a preterm will make him more prone for adverse events, etc., etc. We've started vaccinating babies as soon as they have become hemodynamically stable right in the NICU. We know that we have to vaccinate the babies according to their chronological age. We don't wait for their corrected age. So if the baby is born 45 days postnatal age, we start the immunization then. Okay, so at birth immunizations do happen, and the schedule is according to as usual as any other infant who is born. The doses that we use are much similar to the full-term infants. Even though the antibody titer that are elicited are little lesser than the term infants, it has been proved that they are quite enough to protect the preterm infants against the vaccine preventable diseases. So the most common site is anterolateral, 22 to 25 gauge needle, who is little shorter in length of 5 or 8 inch. So we need to exercise caution in monitoring these babies. Most of the time we start the first immunization during their NICU stay. Once they get stabilized, more severe illness at birth or their chronological age is going to be less than 65 days, or somebody who's had an apneic episode during the past 24 hours, these are the high risk babies, and we need to monitor them on a monitor for bradycardia and desaturations for a period of 48 to 72 hours. Otherwise, a baby who has been having a fairly seamless course in NICU, who's off caffeine, no apneas for the past 1 week, I think they can be vaccinated with much, not with much anxiety. So all the vaccines are similar, both in preterm and term. Only thing, hepatitis B alone differs. It is based upon the birth weight and the maternal HPS-AG status. For a baby whose mother's is not exposed to HPS-AG and is less than 2 kg, we would vaccinate him at the time of discharge or when he's less than 30 days. So seroconversion does happen to a good level after 30 days. So we vaccinate him at that. In case his maternal status is HPS-AG positive, then we do vaccinate him at birth, but we don't take the 0 dose into account. We continue the rest of the vaccination series as usual. So that is the only difference. The other vaccines that we opt for in preterms are rota, influenza, and pertussis, etc. For pertussis and influenza, we don't vaccinate them at birth. We adopt what is the principle called a targeted immunization or cocooning. We can't put in the vaccine to the preterm. Instead, we vaccinate all the adults who are around this preterm so that the disease does not reach the preterm per se. So any adult above 19 years gets vaccinated for pertussis in a house where a preterm gets discharged and goes home. Similarly for influenza. For influenza, we start vaccinating the preterm infant per se at 6 months with 2 doses later on. And for pneumococcal, our government has been one of the pilot states in giving pneumococcal vaccination to BLBW infants after discharge. We do it at 6, 10, 14 and one booster dose at 16 to 24 months. So that finishes off my immunization. The screening test and the developmental surveillance. Yes, sir. I'll take just 2 more minutes. So this is my heartfelt thanks to RSS sir. I think he has made my job easy. Red flag signs and whatever the pediatrician needs to pick up bedside to identify developmental delays at early age has been well enumerated. So these are the little checklists that we have to keep when you follow up a preterm who's coming to you for a further care. So we do the blood test like hemoglobin every 2 weeks when they come up. Phosphorus and alkaline phosphatase. We complete the thyroid screening if it has not been done in the NICU. We do neuroimaging and MRI if needed. And based on all this clinical assessment and your neuroimaging findings and other risk factors during their neonatal course, the primary physician allots them a risk stratification. So not every preterm is at risk of neurodevelopmental impairment later on. And a baby who does not have any other signs may show up even impairment later on in life. So it is very mandatory in a resource limited setting that we categorize them into this risk stratification and accordingly follow them up with duration and intensity of the follow-up is according to this risk stratification. So any preterm who's born less than 30 weeks or less than 1.2 kg per se will make them a risk factor for a severe neurodevelopmental impairment later on. So a follow-up schedule has to be very rigorous in such babies. So this is a possible schedule that we adopt in our center. For a mild delay, we usually advocate a 3-4 visits, and moderate and severe, the visits are much more. So during their visits, we do a neurological examination, which comprises of a short version of Hammersmith head circumference, and for any tonal abnormalities, reflexes, etc., and look up for all the red flag signs that RSSR has elicited previously to look up for early signs of CP developing on later. So the cognition, everything is tested. So this would be our checklist for the follow. We tend to do DASI for all the infants at 12 months and language testing starts from 4 months. Initially, we do it with the Denver developmental screening and then subsequently, if there is any impairment, then we do it at 12 and 24 months with DASI. So regarding vision screening, we do it for ROP and ROP not treated. We know still the preterm has risk for developing complications like ocular complications, myopia, strabismus, visual perception problems, etc. A primary physician needs to be aware that these problems are possible in my preterm. So it is up to him to just fix an appointment with an ophthalmologist and get the checklist done. So fixation has to be done, checked at 2 to 3 months. Squint has to be ruled out by 6 to 8 months, and with no ROP or ROP does not require treatment further, no follow-up after 2 years. But for the other category where you have ROP treated or sight-threatening ROP, the ophthalmologist decides on the follow-up. So this is the ROP follow-up protocol. Regarding hearing screening, any newborn at 3 month preterm infant completes his screening for hearing impairment by 3 months corrected age, either by OAE or automated audiometry brainstem response according to the risk factor during the NICU course. And his hearing impairment needs to be confirmed before 6 months and intervention has to be made before 6 months corrected age, because only then you can expect a development much equal to an other child without a hearing impairment. So this is a summary of what we document at our follow-up visits, and the entire thing has been collated as a book which we follow it up. This is a courtesy from Naveen Jain sir, which he's been doing it at Trivandrum KIMS, and we have customized it to our center. Thanks to the patient listening from all during this evening. This is my preterm who of late got discharged and came up for follow-up 2 to 3 days ago. And there's my resident with this book, having finished the follow-up checklist for him. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for the patient